Live from Liverpool, The Dark Paranormal, Season 19. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Episode 7, Season 19 of The Dark Paranormal. It's unbelievable that we're only 4 episodes, inclusive of this one, away from the end of this season and then the season break, and we look forward to Season 20. A monumentous season because, well, not yearly, but it is our 20th anniversary, so to speak. And we are working on a series of surprises and little things which I think will make Season 20 the best thing we've ever done. And I'm really crossing my fingers when I say that, because this last 2 weeks has been literally the phrase ghosts in the machine. If it could go wrong, it has gone wrong. But if you enter that mindset doing a show, it will go wrong. So I'm determined not to on this one. And this one is very special because it's very rare to receive a series of experiences from somebody who is highly qualified and educated, who is a rational skeptic, who then experiences something paranormal, and instead of trying to deflect it or try and find a rational explanation, they instead decide to dive headfirst into the topic. And you'll understand what I mean when I say they decide to dive headfirst in when you've listened to this episode. You could argue very easily, well, that wasn't the most terrifying of Dark Paranormal episodes. But is it one of the most interesting? I most definitely think so. And also how the experiencer explains their point of view throughout the experience, it does leave kind of a way that you, the listener, can decide just how terrifying this episode is. Do you follow the path of logic and rationale? Or do you see other things within the episode? It will be really interesting to hear your comments on it. And don't forget, the email address to do so is the same as the one that you would submit your experiences for Season 20. And that's contact@thedarkparanormal.com. And please don't forget, we don't mind the length of your submission. If it's of a certain length that fits the Dark Paranormal main show, it will find a place there. If it's shorter but still semi-long, it will be in a mini-sode. And if it's shorter, even a paragraph, it will find its way onto Dark Bites. The only thing I would say is if you're expecting your experience to be read out on the main edition of the Dark Paranormal, please try and keep it to 6 one-sides of A4. That way, it's a perfect length for us to run the show as we always have. That said, if your experience requires being, say, 10, 11 pages long, still send it in. Very occasionally, we may split an episode into 2 if we feel it's got that special something that I know our listeners would love to hear. Or if it's a tale which tells itself over those 11 pages, we may save it for the finale or for a debut. But either way, do not let the length of your experience stop you from emailing contact@thedarkparanormal.com with your experiences. Now, before I do our usual Patreon shout-outs before today's experience, if you're the sort of person who tries to skip to the experience, and I don't blame you for doing so, and I would say to aim for around 6.5 to 7 minutes, as I have a small announcement regarding Patreon. In the show notes of today's episode, there will be a slightly amended way of how I believe you should join our Patreon. And the issue is to do with a sort of agreement, after argument, I think, between Patreon and Apple. So basically, if you subscribe through the app, you will pay more, and you might not get the tea you're expecting. To use simple truth with it, if you do it through the app, you will pay more to Apple. Patreon don't see any of that raise, neither do I. If you go on to a laptop or even on your phone to the Patreon site itself, and you log in there and you set up an account and subscribe doing it that way, you can then download the Patreon app and log in, and you'll be paying the normal price that everyone else has previously and have access to the tier you should. We were basically given as creators two options: one, to raise our prices to absorb the cost for Apple, or to take it on the chin and absorb the cost. I chose the latter because loyal listeners should not be charged, because one company, the main company, has threatened to remove an app from the store unless they agree to this charge. So if you are thinking of becoming a new Patreon, and I'm about to explain the reasons why you should, look at the show notes and follow those instructions. Because we have built a wonderful community of like-minded paranormal enthusiasts just like you. And I genuinely, as I've said, believe it to be one of the safest paranormal discussion spaces online. Even today's submitter is a Patreon and signs off, like many of our Patreons do, with a thank you for making a space that's so welcoming and also safe. But I didn't do that. The patrons themselves made that happen. It's almost miraculous, genuinely. And I say that, as I've said before, as someone who has scoured paranormal forums that always end up in a hierarchical structure and some sort of fall apart at the end. This is not that in the slightest, it's the opposite. And when you sign up, not only do you receive everything that's on this main feed, both ad-free and before everyone else, but you can also gain access to the full back catalogue of Dark Bites, the weekly Patreon-only podcast, which is 30 minutes each week of the shorter stories we receive. And there is over 100 hours of stories you won't have heard. And a new one is released every week of the year, even on the downtime in between seasons. That's 52 weeks a year of a brand new podcast you won't have heard before. Head over to patreon.com/The Dark Paranormal and join our community today. Here are some of our wonderful new team members that have done that very thing. Misty, Zara L, Liam, Princesses, John, Tori Gilliam, Jose Cabada, Lucas Helene, Katina Walters, Cheryl Bazaki, Lee Meaden, Lou, Ryan Bergstrom, Kim Carroll, Latina Lonya, Erica Crawford, Teddy, Sarah S, Terry, Alan Devine, Victoria and Brian Stein. Thank you so much, guys. Your support literally makes you co-founders and co-creators of this show, and I genuinely appreciate each and every one of you because you allow this show to keep the blood in its veins. And if it sounds like you want to be part of this mission, head over to patreon.com/The Dark Paranormal. Yes, that was longer than I wished for an intro. However, the important message to get out was to try and save you guys some money who wish to become Patreons. So I apologise, but I think it's important information. And right now, it's time. Lower the lights, make yourself comfortable, and most importantly, leave your disbelief at the door. As together we listen to Ghosts Weren't Real Until They Were. Now, as a little prefix to today's experience, I want to read out the email that was sent in accompanying the experiences of Dr. Steve. And he wrote, "Hi Kev, I'm a 62-year-old dermatologist / MOHS surgeon, I'm a conservative Christian, and former obnoxious skeptic living in Alabama, US. In May of 2012, I had my world paradigm change overnight when I went to a haunted hotel to prove to my teenage daughter that the ghosts aren't real. I am attaching the story of what happened for your consideration for your podcast. I'm also attaching some photos of the hotel we stayed at, the Crescent Hotel, and a photo of my paranormal lab, the Haunted Castle House. After my fears subsided from our experiences, I went all in trying to learn all I could about the paranormal, investigating places across both the US and the UK, and eventually buying a haunted house to serve as a lab of sorts, where I knew nothing could be staged and contamination from others would not be a concern. I love your podcasts, and having become a Patreon recently, I've been catching up on old episodes on my daily walk through our woods. We live on 60 acres. Thanks for all you do and keep up the good work. Sincerely, Steve, MD. I've purposely left Steve's surname out. He didn't ask me to, but I also thought it would be for the best. Given a full doctor's name out, that could easily be searched. Also, the pictures and videos that he will mention within his experience will be available on our Patreon page. And that's simply because that's a space that I can store them on. But right now, this was Dr. Steve's submission. Hi Kev, I'm a long-time listener and now Patreon member. I love your show and the community you've created, and I appreciate the time and hard work you put into all of your podcasts. I'd like to submit one of my personal experiences for your consideration. I'm a 62-year-old physician, a husband and father of 4, and a conservative Christian. I never had any paranormal experiences growing up, or if I did, I was oblivious to them. Our family, and my friends for that matter, never discussed the paranormal whilst we grew up. On rare occasions, Bigfoots or USOs or ghosts did come up. My dad would rather matter-of-factly let us know that these things simply weren't real. No big deal. They just did not exist. It was fine if children wanted to make believe. But as one reached adulthood, they would leave those beliefs in the past as they become more educated and rational. In undergraduate school, I majored in biology and minored in chemistry. I then spent 4 years in medical school, completed a 1-year internship in internal medicine and a 3-year residency program in dermatology. All this just further reinforced my belief that the supernatural was either something natural that hadn't yet been explained, or was utter nonsense. Adults who believed in these things fell into one of several categories for me: attention seekers, the mentally unstable, alcohol or drug addicts, the sleep-deprived, charlatans, etc. In spring 2012, our oldest daughter, Brooke, was 16. She and one of her friends became convinced that our house was haunted. I, on the other hand, was convinced they were simply the victims of older brothers scaring them, or perhaps imaginations running wild. Nothing more, nothing less. Our house was relatively new, and in a recently developed area, Upper End subdivision. We were the second owners of our home, and there was no dark or unusual history associated with our house. To our knowledge, there was also no peculiar history linked to the land the subdivision was developed on either. All homes have certain sounds they will make when the weather changes. The central heating or air conditioning comes on. But they're simply settling noises. Obviously, our house was no exception, and it had its fair share of these particular sounds. I tried explaining these to my daughter and her friend, but they were still convinced our house was haunted. They claimed to hear footsteps, see doors slamming, notice the dogs acting strangely in certain rooms, etc. For every event they claimed to have happened, I had a logical, rational explanation for its nature. After all, with our 4 kids, the numerous friends who were in and out, pranks were to be expected. Or perhaps someone was in the house they were unaware of. The house was 3 stories and 7,000 square feet, so someone could have easily come via the basement, unbeknownst to them if they were upstairs. Besides, if strange things were rarely occurring, surely I would have witnessed them too. However, as is often the case, my sage fatherly perspective did very little to convince either of them of their folly. But as time passed, my other children and now ex-wife began hearing and seeing things too. I attributed this primarily to the power of suggestion, feeding into overactive imaginations. I personally continue to experience nothing out of the ordinary. But Brooke was both fascinated and scared by those events she experienced. Her curiosity, though, outweighed her fear, and she decided she wanted to get a Ouija board to investigate the hauntings and possibly find out who these ghosts really were. When she asked me about it, I agreed, knowing that a spirit board was simply a mass-produced toy with no supernatural powers. In fact, I thought it was a good idea, since I was certain that her inevitable fruitless sessions would aid me in convincing her that there's no such thing as ghosts. So I ordered one online. And as soon as she and a few friends started playing with it regularly, according to them, they got lots of answers. Nothing dark or scary. One night, whilst they were playing with the board, I went upstairs to check on them. They were particularly excited this night because the board was, and I quote, really active. I informed them it really wasn't a spirit communicating with them, but rather it was instead simply one of the girls moving the planchette in an attempt to scare the others. Immediately they all swore they weren't moving it, and that it definitely was a spirit talking to them. So I offered them a challenge. I said, if it's really a spirit, ask it to reveal my father's middle name. They gladly took to the board, and the planchette began moving and spelled out Bob. I triumphantly informed them that the spirit was incorrect and that the answer was actually Grey. I also pointed out that the spirit had failed to get even one letter right. I went on to explain the reason the spirit got it wrong was because none of them knew the correct answer, so they couldn't cheat. Of course, they discounted my explanation and said the spirit got it wrong because of my disbelief. My skepticism apparently had interfered with their communication with the spirit. I made some sarcastic comment to the effect that their spirit must be really insecure if my doubts prevented it from answering a simple question. This observation was met by more protests from the group and an insistence that I was the problem, not the spirit. So I left them to their game. Eventually, I decided my daughter was old enough that she needed to leave this make-believe world behind. Her belief in ghosts and hauntings had gone from cute to annoying. She had gotten her siblings and her mum to join in on this crazy train, and I was getting tired of having to continually fix make-believe problems. I decided the best way to prove that ghosts weren't real and were all in her head, a mere figment of her overactive imagination, would be to go to an alleged haunted hotel for the weekend. Here she could see firsthand that ghosts don't exist. Once she would realise the old buildings naturally creak, uneven floors can affect your equilibrium and perception, that old wiring make lights flicker, etc. All the ghosts of the hotel, and by the extension the ghosts of our house, would be quickly debunked, and we could close this chapter of her naivety. We decided on the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, as our proving ground. It was billed as the most haunted hotel in America. On several different websites, the hotel and the town itself looked like it would be a very nice vacation. So I chose a weekend, booked the rooms, and felt more than a little smug with my genius idea. I even purchased a very inexpensive full-spectrum video camera to aid our upcoming investigation. At this time, Judy and I were friends, were now married, and she'd mentioned that her fiancé, David, had been interested in the paranormal for many years and had been to the Crescent for several investigations. So I invited them to join us on this trip, as not only were we good friends, but I also believed that having a real paranormal investigator would ensure that we did our due diligence with respect to investigating. I could never have imagined the impact this road trip would have on the rest of my life, nor how intensely my genius idea would very quickly backfire. Let's take a quick break to tell you about a wonderful product. Did you know there are more than 1,000 hormone disruptors living rent-free in our world? From the food we eat to the air we breathe, even the skincare we use, they could be messing with your hormones and making you feel like you're stuck in a mystery of your own. And just like a plot twist in a true crime story or one of those unexpected scary moments in our submitters' experiences, hormonal changes like premenopause or menopause can strike at the most unexpected times. And suddenly you're dealing with mood swings, sleepless nights, and all those other symptoms that make you feel like you're losing control. But here's the good news. This is one mystery you can solve with Happy Mammoth. Just take the 2-minute free quiz from Happy Mammoth, answer a few simple questions about what you're experiencing and where you're at in life, and you'll uncover the real culprit behind your hormonal symptoms. And the best part? After taking the quiz, you'll get a personalised recommendation to help you balance your hormones so you can feel like yourself again. The results are impressive. There are over 40,000 reviews on their website. Women cannot stop talking about it on social media. A bottle of Hormone Harmony is sold every 24 seconds. According to a survey, 86% of the women started losing weight, 77% say it improved their mood, and the biggest benefit? 100% of the women surveyed said they're feeling like themselves again. For a limited time, you can get 15% off your entire first order at happymammoth.com. Just use the code Dark Paranormal at checkout. That's happymammoth.com and use the code Dark Paranormal for 15% off today. We quickly checked in, unpacked, and met back up for the official hotel ghost tour. Our tour that night was to be led by Ramsey the butler. He gave us an excellent presentation on the history of the Crescent, its hauntings, and a brief overview of ghost hunting in general. The only thing of note that happened during the tour was an interaction we supposedly had with the ghost of Michael whilst we were down in the morgue. Ramsey placed his EMF detector on the floor and proceeded to ask questions, which Michael occasionally answered by lighting the device up. It was interesting, but not overly impressive, and I felt quite certain that it was reacting to all of our cell phones rather than a spirit. I also thought surely at the most haunted hotel in America, the ghosts can do better things than making a light flicker randomly on some sketchy device. Before the night would be over, however, I would learn firsthand that, indeed, they could. After the tour, we got our cameras and our audio recorders and started hunting ghosts. As expected, nothing really happened. Eventually, we finished our hunting and we were ready to call it a night. Before we went to bed, I set a video camera up using night vision to record our room all night long, just in case anything paranormal or otherwise happened. My daughter chose the bed furthest from the door, and I took the one next to it. I positioned a video recorder so that it would include all of my bed and the entry door, and I began recording. Brooke and I rehashed the events of the evening and made our plans for the next day before calling it a night. Both of us were still smugly believing that we were getting closer to convincing the others that they were wrong. That night would soon provide the answer we both sought and forever change the trajectory of my life. I fell asleep rather quickly. However, 3 times that night I was awoken. Twice by what sounded like chains jingling, and once by the fragrance of an older perfume being squirted directly up my right nostril. When I got up that next morning, I was a little embarrassed at myself. I thought, surely I must have imagined everything. I'd let Ramsey's tales and the ambience of the place get to me. I was as simple-minded and prone to suggestion as those I'd long ridiculed. My daughter, on the other hand, slept well, denied waking up or hearing anything strange throughout the night. So I started watching the video from overnight to verify that I'd simply imagined or dreamt everything. However, while watching, I heard the jingling chains, and I saw myself sitting up trying to locate the source. Once I saw nothing was there, I lay back down and went to sleep. I continued to watch the video, then saw myself once again roused from my sleep. This time I was sitting up and digging at my right nostril. I was looking towards my daughter's bed, and I do remember thinking at that time, what in the hell did she just do? She, however, was sound asleep, not moving a muscle. I rubbed my right nostril several times, trying to get that smell out, and looked all around. Once I'd reassured myself that nothing was out of place, I simply laid back down and drifted off to sleep. At this point, I stopped watching the video. The memories of that night, unfortunately, had been confirmed. I was feeling more than a little crestfallen as I was being bested by something that wasn't supposed to exist. Little did I know, the biggest surprise was yet to come. Once I showed the recording to my daughter, she was excited both by what she saw and by the fact that I was going down in defeat. We went with a mixture of excitement and confusion to Judy and David's room to share the news of the night and show them the evidence. Of course, we also wanted to see if they'd experienced anything paranormal, and I was really hoping they had not. And I was relieved to learn that their night had been uneventful. We all watched the video, and they were equally surprised at what they saw. Initially, I had found the areas of interest on the video by fast-forwarding until I saw myself sitting up. But we then decided to watch the entire video to see if anything else might have happened that I was unaware of. As we were watching the part of the video between the jingling chains around 2 a.m. and the perfume atomizer around 5 a.m., I'm seen sleeping on my left side with my feet and lower legs sticking out from under the covers. My right foot was resting on top of my left foot near the ankle. For about 30 minutes, my right foot would make subtle movements, like as sliding forward then moving back into its resting position. It would also slide upwards slightly, then return down to where it had been. Other than my foot, I was perfectly still. Around the 4 a.m. mark, Judy noticed something in the lower right-hand corner of the screen near my right foot. We rewound the video and watched it. This time, and every time I retell this, I still feel like I've absolutely lost my mind, but we all saw what looked like a black skeleton finger touch my right foot near the heel and then pull back quickly. We all gasped. I couldn't get a sentence out as I pointed to my foot saying, "It touched. Something touched my foot right there." We attempted to debunk it several times to no avail. We all kept seeing the same impossible thing. Something that wasn't supposed to be real was now apparently playing with my foot whilst I slept. So many thoughts rushed through my mind. What was that? Will it come back again tonight? Will there be a mark on my foot? I've got so many people I need to apologize to for doubting their stories. And how does this all fit into my Christian faith, my medical training, my prior life experiences? Still somewhat in shock, but a little more open-minded, we spent most of that evening doing EVP sessions, all to no avail, and taking pictures throughout the hotel and grounds. When bedtime arrived, I again sat the original camera back where it was and plugged it into an outlet so it could record again all night. This time I also placed my full-spectrum video camera in the back corner of a recessed area, aimed at the bed, so now I would be covering my bed from 2 different angles. This second camera should have had at least 6 hours of recording time. I also turned on my cell phone's audio recorder and laid it next to my bed, between it and the door. I decided I was going to sleep with my feet out from under the cover, despite my apprehension, in the hopes of enticing my ghostly visitor to come back out again. I fell asleep surprisingly easily that night, and when I awoke the next morning, nothing had happened. So I thought. I went to check my first video camera, and for some reason, at approximately 1 a.m., it had shut off. I checked the second camera, and same thing. Both cameras had plenty of memory and should have recorded for a minimum of 6 hours, instead of 1. Finally, I went to listen to my cell phone's audio recorder to see if it malfunctioned too. As I listened to it, just before 1 a.m., I hear a sound like a baby cooing, followed by a man saying something unintelligible, and then a woman saying, "Turn him off." These voices were recorded at the same time both of my cameras stopped. Roughly 20 minutes later into that audio recording, and there is a deep guttural growl that neither I nor my daughter heard whilst we were sleeping. I am a naturally light sleeper. With 4 kids and being on call 24 hours a day, I wake up very easily. I'll freely admit that this could have come from someone walking down the hall, maybe at 1:20 a.m, playing a prank. However, just the sound of someone walking down that hallway was audible. So it's hard for me to imagine that neither I nor my daughter would have heard a person outside of our door growling loudly. After seeing this video, Judy and David decided to also record their last night in hopes of capturing something too. They both slept relatively well, and they were pretty sure nothing had occurred. They were leaving fairly early and didn't get a chance to review the video until they made the 9-hour trip back home to Alabama. However, once they did, their video proved to be more disconcerting than mine had ever been. They set their recorder on a dresser facing the bed. While they were sleeping, Judy was on the edge of the bed furthest from the door into the room, and David was next to her. The camera went out of focus for about a minute. Then everything cleared back up. A few moments later, after this, it looked like part of the sheet on the opposite side of the bed, the side closest to the door, was rising up in a wave-like form several feet above the bed. On closer inspection, however, they could clearly see that the real sheets weren't actually moving at all. Nor were they. In actual fact, the sheet that was moving was translucent and clearly floating over the real sheets beneath. After several seconds of this movement, the top part of this ethereal sheet was pulled down and towards the head of the bed like a person would do if they were tucking themselves in for the night. They could then clearly see a third head lift up and quickly fall back down, as if the ghost had satisfactorily made its nest and was now ready to go to sleep. Judy and David were totally unaware anything had happened until they got home and watched the video. For those interested, the room they stayed in was 407. Brooke and I stayed in room 212. After this, Judy wouldn't sleep with the lights off for over a month, and her feet had to be securely under the covers at all times. After my initial shock, my curiosity overrode my fear, and I began investigating and researching the paranormal in both the US and UK. I eventually bought a haunted house that served as my paranormal lab. I would reach out to friends, and eventually patients, and somewhat timidly at first, share my stories with them. Some of these people I'd known all of my adult life, and we'd never discussed this topic. Almost every one of them followed up my story with, "Well, now that you've shared your story, let me tell you what happened to me one time." They said they never previously mentioned anything because they didn't want to be labelled as crazy. After this trip, activity continued at my house until we moved out 3 years later, and I started witnessing things there too. During those last 3 years, my 2 daughters seemed to be the focus of our ghosts' activity, and went from paranormal enthusiasts to trying to avoid it like the plague. I'd be glad to share more about that if you're interested. Thanks again for your wonderful podcast and giving folks a safe platform to share their experiences. Sincerely, Steve. Well, Dr. Steve, thank you so much for one of the most interesting experiences I think I've ever received. And kudos to you, because for a skeptic, especially a skeptic educated to a doctor level, to have their worldview shattered and then want to investigate it as opposed to subdue it, it speaks rather highly of your character. For me, your personality type coming through strongly in your... For me, your personality seems to come across strongly in your emails, and I think if we had more of the scientific community who were willing to say, I don't believe in this thing, but if you claim it's happened, or if you, as in your experience, gain an experience of it happening, instead of trying to rationalize it, you try and find why. If the scientific community had that view all round, I think the topic would be much less taboo. You even end your email saying you mentioned your story and experience to other people, and they then felt safe to tell you theirs. And that's often the case. Many people will tell you who have believed in this topic since they were children, for example. People will open up when you open up. But please continue what you're doing. It sounds like a noble and an exceptional thing that you are doing. Please keep us both informed of the progress of your paranormal lab. And you do ask at the end if we'd like to know more information regarding your daughters trying to avoid the house like a plague. And yes, in all honesty, 100% yes, please, Steve, we would love to hear more experiences from your family, because that, for me, was so interesting in terms of anything that changes somebody's perspective, their worldview. Many people use phrases like, my worldview was destroyed, but you said changed. And not only did it change, you then headed in that direction to investigate more. And for me, that doesn't only warrant praise, it warrants all the luck in the world I can throw to you in regards to getting results that you could find. Because you are exactly what this community needs. People of rational, logical, scientific backgrounds acting as almost a bridge between, and I include myself in this, those of us who not necessarily believe blindly, but have a strong leaning towards belief, and those who, as your former self did, write everything else off as pure nonsense and fabrication. So, Steve, sincerely thank you for sending this excellent email in, and yes, we would love to hear more. Don't forget, everyone, if you want to send your experiences in, email contact@thedarkparanormal.com, and from Steve's email, I've decided we're going to cover this week for Dark Realms, the Crescent Hotel. So please stay tuned for that, and of course, we are now doing that on YouTube too, so if you head over to youtube.com/thedarkparanormal, you'll be able to subscribe and watch the video edition. But don't worry, the audio format will still be coming out on this feed. And so, until episode 8, 3 more to go. I will say thank you once again for joining me on this wonderful experience from Steve. And of course, if you did skip the beginning part and are interested in joining our wonderful team at Patreon, please read the show notes and do so that way. But until next week, remember, whenever you're talking about the paranormal, always try and leave some of your disbelief at the door. And I'll see you next week, right here on the Dark Paranormal.